According to a list on Variety.com, the name of this movie is Cosmic 3000. According to the fake Disney slate, it's called Galactic. Yeah, let me talk about that fake slate for a second. Not too long ago, I think about a couple weeks ago, there was this slate that was leaked. It was like a board showing all the upcoming Disney films, the directors who are directing them, and then the release dates next to them. And it went, it was Big Hero 6, Zootopia, Giants, Moana, Dean Wellins film, and then King of the Elves. And Moana was bearing the title Spirited, keeping, much like Tangled and Frozen, the one-word adjective titles. And it has never been officially confirmed that Moana was retitled Spirited. I mean, Moana wasn't ever officially confirmed either. I'd wait for an announcement from Disney themselves. And also, if you look at that thing, it looks fake. And my friends and I looked it over, and it just looked fake. It looked like it was photoshopped and thrown together. And also, if you look at the Galactic / Dean Wellins film / Cosmic 3000 project, you'll see that Jennifer Lee is listed as director below Dean Wellins. And to me, that looks like some fan listened to or read that interview with Jennifer Lee, who's the director of Frozen and the screenwriter of Wreck-It Ralph. It's like that person looked at the interview where she said, one day I want to direct a sci-fi film. It's just like they looked at that and then said, well, she's going to direct the sci-fi film with Dean Wellins. And it's going to be, it's fake. And if you look at King of the Elves, Rich Moore is listed next to, under Chris Williams. Chris Williams was supposed to direct King of the Elves, but then the project was dropped. It was on and off at Disney. Okay, I'm going to have to explain this. Okay, so King of the Elves was announced in 2008 as a 2012 release, and it was going to be directed by Aaron Blaise and Robert Walker, who were the directors of Brother Bear. But they were booted off the project in 2009, and the project was put on the shelf for a little while. But then in 2010, Chris Williams, the director, one of the two directors of Bolt, he got on board the project and he was going to direct it. And in 2011, it was in a race of sorts with Frozen to see which one would make the 2013 release date, because they had to fill the gap and Disney didn't have a 2013 release at the time. Wreck-It Ralph moved up to 2012 and Big Hero 6 was expected for 2014, even though it hadn't been announced at that point. So what they did was they put King of the Elves, according to Honor Hunter, and usually he's right about these things, they put King of the Elves in a race with Frozen, like a sort of production race to see which one would be the 2013 release. And Frozen was the one that was moving along, so Frozen ended up moving forward. Chris Williams, he kind of jumped off the project and went to go work on other things. Chris Williams right now is currently the second director of Big Hero 6 alongside Don Hall. He was added New Year's Eve to the project. Kind of like how they added Jennifer Lee to Frozen very late in the game. So, yeah, that's what Chris Williams is doing right now. And we haven't heard much about King of the Elves since. King of the Elves, according to Honor Hunter, no real progress was made on it last year. So, we can't just assume that that's what Disney is going to release after whatever it is that comes out in 2018. Because they have 2 releases set for 2016 and 2 for 2018. And originally, Blue Sky Disney thought that Dean Wellins' Space Epic was going to be the November 2018 release after Moana in March 2018. But given what he's found out last summer, it probably won't come out in 2018 unless they get the story in good shape and then they kick it back into high gear. So that thing, it looks like a fan looked at Walt Disney Animation Studios' current slate, and then they looked at the reports from Blue Sky Disney and stuff like that interview with Jennifer Lee, and they just put together that fake slate, assuming that all that was going to happen. And Moana is listed for a 2017 release as opposed to a 2018 release. Right now, Pixar has 2 films scheduled for 2017, one in the summer and one in the autumn. So I don't think there's going to be any way Disney can get Moana out that year. And it just seems like that person put together that thing just to sort of get speculation going, and I just noticed, right away that it was just fake. And, it just seems like, and I know a lot of people got upset for like, oh no, they're going to title Moana Spirited. Not to worry. That thing is most likely not real. We looked at it, all my Disney fan friends and I, we looked at it, and it looked fake. It seemed fake. It just seemed like it was put together based on assumptions. And then, of course, Jennifer Lee, she said in an interview recently, I want to direct a sci-fi film. And then it just seems like one person read that interview and then said, well, I know, she'll be directing the space epic movie with Dean Wellins. No. I would take all that with a grain of salt. I usually wait for someone like Honor Hunter or Brendan Connolly, a Bleeding Cool, for details or an official announcement. I don't go by something that apparently surfaced on Tumblr or whatever. So, yeah, take all that spirited, galactic, Jennifer Lee directing the space epic stuff with a grain of salt. Today, April 3rd, I'm recording this on April 3rd, Henry Jackman, who was the composer of Wreck-It Ralph's score and also Winnie the Pooh 2011's score, he said today, because he did the score for Captain America the Winter Soldier, he said today that they're definitely writing a story for a second Wreck-It Ralph film, and he says that's all I can tell you. And this is definitely, and they've been hinting at a Wreck-It Ralph 2 for a while. Like, when Wreck-It Ralph came out, like a month after the movie came out, Rich Moore said, I'd love to revisit that world, and if I do a sequel, I mean, that's not exactly what he said, but he said, like, if I do a sequel, then Mario will show up. And, I was a little iffy on it. I still am. But since it seems to be, a reality, I say bring it on, because Wreck-It Ralph, and this is going to sound weird, but I think Wreck-It Ralph, out of all the films made by Walt Disney Animation Studios, I think that one actually kind of calls for a sequel, because in Wreck-It Ralph, we're only in Litwak's arcade, and he has how many games? Like, there's many things to explore. There's online gaming and, consoles and stuff like that. They can explore the world of today's video gaming, because they took a jab at today's gaming in the form of the hero's duty sequences. But imagine like a Wreck-It Ralph 2 where it completely takes place in a modern game setting, or Ralph goes from game to game to game. He goes to like several different games with like different animation styles. Like, that would be really cool. Like, that would be really risky if Ralph went to some video games and the animation style like changes. Like, he goes to like an indie game or something that's done in a very minimalist hand-drawn animation style, and it'll actually be sort of half hand-drawn. And they can bring it back in the form of a Wreck-It Ralph sequel, because the first one was a hit and people will go see the second one. But I'm getting ahead of myself here, because, that's the hand-drawn fan of me, hoping for some way that hand-drawn can make it to the big screen. But what was great about Wreck-It Ralph was that the three different worlds he goes to all have different styles. Like, they're all computer animated, but they all have different, like, styles in terms of the art direction and the way the characters look, the inhabitants look, the feel, the score, the color work, the choice of color and everything. That was one of the things I really loved about Wreck-It Ralph's animation. I mean, the whole movie looked excellent, but that's one particular element I liked. But if they do a sequel where he explores other areas of gaming, they can really pull off, it could be a real challenge. You could pull off lots of different animation styles, lots of different art styles. That would be just so cool. And, visiting different worlds, that's all ripe for parody and satire and everything. They can make fun of all kinds of games that are on the market today. So the focus isn't entirely on retro games or one particular game, because most of Wreck-It Ralph does take place in Sugar Rush. Now, I don't think that's a bad thing. I mean, story matters, but imagine if we got to see more games and we got to see more of Rich Moore, the director's take on these games, Like, Wreck-It Ralph had a good level of satire in it, and like I said, the hero's duty sequence, it's a nice poke at today's video games, today's first-person shooters, and all those bleak, sci-fi games. And imagine what else they can, kind of make fun of in the sequel if they get around to making it. I mean, how would Ralph get to console games? Like, would he use a portal to get to a console game? Like, what if they come up with this storyline where Litwax is closing down and, there's like no, like, they make it kind of tragic. Like, the first one ends on such a happy note because the idea that there's an arcade still running in North America, it's such a really, like, a really nice, thing to know. And these characters, these arcades are kept alive in some way or another. But how about in the sequel, Litwax goes out of business and, just hard times and everything, and they have to think of something. And also, what would be cool is, and I think somebody pointed this out a while back, have Wreck-It Ralph find out in a sort of Toy Story 2-esque fashion how his character and Fix-It Felix's character, continued for generations. Like Ralph and Felix can discover that, there was a Fix-It Felix 2, and then there was like a Fix-It Felix 3, there was like Fix-It Felix for the NES, and then like once the Sega Genesis and SNES came along, there could have been like updates, like Super Fix-It Felix Jr., and then like Fix-It Felix 3D, like the character's first ever 3D game, and Ralph meets all these different looking versions of himself. I mean, that would be really cool just to see that alone. And then they come to a more modern Wreck-It Ralph. And I think of like Mario. And like what it would be funny if Mario of like Super Mario Brothers Mario from 1985 saw like Mario today, like in Super Mario Galaxy or New Super Mario Brothers. Or how would he react if he met, Super Mario 64 Mario? Same thing with Sonic, although they did kind of play with that in Sonic Generations with classic Sonic and new Sonic working together. Which is a really cool idea. That'd be cool if they kind of went that route for Wreck-It Ralph too, where old 1982 Ralph has to work with like 2012 Ralph or 2015 Ralph. Like, there's a lot of possibilities there. Like, there's so much they can do with a sequel. I think they should. I think they can make it. I'm not saying they have to. I'm not saying they should. But if they say we're making a Wreck-It Ralph sequel, I'd root for it. Rich Moore would probably direct the second one anyways. So, and that could be a possible candidate for the November 2018 spot. I mean, if it's being written right now, chances are it's going to get the green light or it's going to move forward, because in the case of, like I said earlier, in the case of Tangled and Frozen, they don't have to make sequels to those. They could just make some spin-offs like shorts, and then they can just go and do the next fairy tale adaptation, Giants, because there's so many fairy tales, there's so many fairy tales to adapt, and there's many fairy tales that Disney has not, and there's many fairy tales that Disney hadn't adapted yet into animated features, so they're good there. But something like Wreck-It Ralph, yeah, they can definitely make a sequel to Wreck-It Ralph. And while it doesn't need a sequel, I would welcome it if they were, gung-ho about it. And that's probably a minority opinion, but I can definitely see a sequel to Wreck-It Ralph working. What do you think?